Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Isa, and today's video is regarding the topic 10 things about switching. I personally really enjoy doing these videos and I'm looking forward to making more of these in the future. But today's topic might be a little bit hard and maybe misunderstood by many people. So please watch this with the reminder that we share our experience and our experience only. It's something we always say, it's something that we have to say, because there will always be people that are like, I don't experience the same thing, or my friend doesn't experience the same thing, so who of you is talking nonsense in that kind of way? But what is important to know about this disorder, that it is very complex, that everybody's experience with dissociative identity disorder varies, and switching is not like switching. Dissociating is not like dissociating. Everybody has their own experience with that. What does that mean? It means that our experience doesn't apply to everybody that has dissociative identity disorder. It might not apply to any other system, and that's alright. It is such a complex disorder that a lot of people have problems to wrap their head around, and because it's full of variety, some people also struggle with accepting this variety. If there's no real structure as to what this disorder looks like and what everybody is experiencing, it's hard to fully grasp the concept that some systems switch more, some systems switch less, some systems have more alters, some systems have less. Some systems yawn while switching, some systems twitch while switching, some systems don't do any of these. So it can be hard to accept and understand that all of this is alright and that all of this is still true and does not make anyone's experience invalid or fake. So we understand that it's hard. It's been hard for us to accept that we aren't like other systems. We are not like every system. It always makes you feel like there's something wrong with you because you have to switch like other systems, because other people that don't even have anything to do with dissociative identity disorder, or specialists that do have something to do with this disorder or that claim to have experience with that, tell you that this is wrong. It invalidates you. It makes you doubt your own experience. It makes you doubt yourself. So we want you to know that we are still individuals. We do have our own experiences. This disorder is very complex. And if you have struggled with wanting to learn about this disorder and struggle to understand all the variety, then make sure to check out other systems experiences. There are now many systems that start speaking up about their journey, that start speaking up about themselves, which is wonderful to see, because a few years ago that wasn't the case. We can only encourage you to get your sources of what this disorder is really like from systems themselves, what they are experiencing, and to learn all this variety, to learn that we are different from another system. So just make sure to check out different sites to learn as many things as possible. So there is the possibility that we don't have the same things to say about switching as yourself, your friends, or whoever, your patients maybe. if you watch this and you work with people that have dissociative identity disorder. It does not make anyone wrong in that case, so that's something important I wanted to say before starting. But now it's been quite a long time, and let's get started finally. Okay, first things first, what is switching? What are systems talking about, or what is anyone talking about when they refer to switching, or this is a switch, we have switched, etc. A switch is when the alter that is fronting, the alter that is out, the alter that is controlling the body is changing position with another alter, so that another alter is getting to the front, that another alter is being able to have control over the body. So that change is referred to as a switch. Now, what does switching look like? Switching can look like a lot of things. Even in our system, there are different switches and different kind of ways we switch. So, for example, in a lot of our videos where we do switch, in a lot of our behind the scenes videos, we yawn while switching, which means that during the switch, our body tends to yawn. So that's not the case for everyone. And to erase some of the confusion, we don't, like, the yawn does not make a switch. The yawn just accompanies the switch. So we switch and the yawn happens. It's not that the yawn happens and then we switch, or due to the yawn we switch. It's the other way around. The yawn is just a sign of us switching. The yawn is just a thing that accompanies it, just like a cough, for example, accompanies a cold, or can accompany a cold. So that means that we can also yawn without switching, or without a switch happening. Usually, like in the past, people just thought we were very tired because we were yawning like a ton of times. And it wasn't really something anyone thought of as weird, because we were just yawning more than other people, but it's not something that's very special or very obvious. So if you know that that's a sign of us switching, you tend to learn that this might have been a switch, because usually, like, when we yawn, it takes a longer time of yawning instead of just a tiny yawn. But in the past, and still now, some people think that we're just very tired. And we, like in the past, we always said, or I always said, it's just, yawning is just not because of being tired, because I never really felt tired when I was asked while I was yawning, or when I just was back to fronting and someone said, like, are you tired? And I was like, kind of, but not as much that I would have to yawn, kind of. So that's one thing. Another thing that happens, or that can happen when we switch, is blinking, or accompanied by like a twitching kind of thing. So some alters just tend to switch like, or like kind of like that. I'm not quite sure how to do that. I've just seen it in our behind the scenes, so I tend to switch out while yawning. I'm not sure if that's just depending on the alters as well, but that's just something I experience a lot. And there are also times that I've seen that switches in our system aren't accompanied by any kind of thing that I could really notice. It's quite rare in our system, but still, I've seen that. Something that's really helpful for that, and that helps me to talk about, is our behind the scenes videos. I take my knowledge of that. I edit a lot of our videos, so I see a lot and learn a lot about our system through editing our videos. I do have help from Vivi a lot of times, or I think Drew is also editing a lot of her videos. Sometimes Jake does that, and sometimes Vivi does it on her own. Next thing, what does switching feel like? It's a question we actually get asked a lot. What does switching feel like? If I could explain it, switching can be a very unpleasant experience. It's like someone kind of drags you into, for example, like the deep depths of water, of the ocean, with you just feeling like you're drowning. You're not able to breathe, you aren't able to fight back, you are just caught in this force that is just dragging you and just keeps like sucking you in, and it's very unpleasant. It kind of takes your breath away. It can make your body be in pain. It causes a lot of distress, and also it's very exhausting. So that's kind of what switching feels like. But sometimes switches are also that sudden that there's not as, like, this process can take a long time, or it's just floop. So that's one thing, which brings us to the other thing, or the next thing, which is how long does it take to switch, as well as what are unsuccessful switches. The period of time that takes one to switch can vary, not just from system to system, but also within a system. There are times where switch is very short and very sudden. It just happens like ploop. You will hear me with ploop and floop a lot, I guess. So switching can just happen like a very short click, and like you flick a switch, like a light switch. And that can just be very confusing, especially if you don't really notice that you have switched out. And when you come back, you just like, oh, I've switched out. Didn't really notice that. But there are also times where switching can take a very long time, which makes the experience this very unpleasant and kind of painful feeling of switching very long. And that's hard to handle. It's something that can make you very confused, very distracted. It can lead to dissociation. It's something like a feeling you can't like get rid of, which is very, very, very unpleasant. As well as there are also switches that are unsuccessful, which is, I think, a bit worse than having or experiencing long switches, because you're just stuck in the feeling of having to switch. You're stuck in this painful process without it just happening. And that's very, very frustrating. It's extremely exhausting, and it just keeps you out of a lot of things. It kind of gets you caught in this experience, which is just not something I wish for anyone, but that's just something that can also happen and has happened. Next thing, how often do we switch? If you know us for a bit, you know that our system switches quite a lot. We are just a very switchy system, which does not make us invalid or seeking for attention. Just some systems switch more than other systems do, and we are more on the more switchy side of the spectrum. So during our day, if we are recording or if we're not recording, we experience quite a lot of switches. These switches can be very quick. These switches can be very tiny, so in the way that someone switches out just for a few minutes. Sometimes it's for a few hours, but it does depend. As well as there are days where we don't switch as much. So some days we switch quite a lot, and some days we don't switch quite a lot, which kind of also leads me to wanting to talk about being front stuck, which is, it just basically describes the inability of a system to switch out. This also is usually accompanied by the complete shutdown of communication between the alter that is fronting and the other alters back in the headspace or the inner world, which can also lead that the alter that is fronting being extremely overwhelmed, having breakdowns, etc., because we as a system work together to kind of live and survive the day-to-day life. And alters individually are not completely able to deal with every situation that is coming up and that you have to go through day by day, which can lead to extreme overwhelm. I, for example, experienced being front stuck a few weeks ago, which was extremely hard for me. I've been feeling anxious a lot. I had a lot of anxiety issues, like they spiked up very high. It made me feel like I just imagine having alters that you kind of make yourself doubt that everything you go through is actually happening, even though I know it is and it was, but still you kind of tend to doubt that. You may fear that this is what's gonna happen forever. You learn to really be thankful for every alter you have that helps you to survive with these situations. It shows you how important your other alters are. Each alter that you have is as important as the other. Just due to the alters you have, you're able to survive. You were able to survive. And every alter is just as valid and just as important as the others. So being front stuck is an extreme stressful situation, can be extremely triggering. It can lead to relapses, can lead to breakdowns, can make symptoms that you're experiencing individually worse. Being front stuck can last for days, can last for weeks, can last for months, and it is disorientating. It is hard to deal with. So that's the thing. It's kind of the opposite of switching. It's the inability of being able to switch, and switching as well as the communication between alters is something that's very, very important for a system to work properly. Now, I already said that we switch a lot, but rapid switching is on another level. And when I say another level, it's really on another level. Rapid switching entails an extreme amount of switching in a short span of time. So within like 10 to 30 minutes, for example, we then can switch up from 10 to 30 times or more or less, which is extremely exhausting. This rapid switching can also be referred to rapid cycling. It is a thing. A lot of people tend to doubt that that's something that can happen, but it definitely is a thing. Rapid switching is usually happening due to an extreme amount of stress that the system is experiencing, and switching itself does not make it any better, because switching itself causes yourself to be in distress, not just mentally but also physically. Switching can be very exhausting for the body. It does cause stress for your body, and it's just adding up on the overall stress that's even causing you to rapidly switch. So getting out of that can be hard, and after rapid switching we usually are extremely exhausted. Like, this exhaustion can hold on for the next days. It's not very pleasant. Just like, I think I've said unpleasant and not very pleasant a lot in this video. I'm sorry for that. Ugh. Also, little me is a bit excited because the last few hours we played a game I loved playing when I was younger, which is which overall is particularly. Okay. Where was I? Rapid switching. So if you are interested in seeing more about rapid switching, there are a few videos on our channel that have footage of rapid switching. It can be quite intense, so if you are triggered by these things, then you don't have to watch them. You can also read about rapid switching or rapid cycling. There are not a lot of articles that I've personally found, which was very hard because we just personally felt that that's something very wrong about us, because it's very weird, and we haven't seen other systems struggle with that, but somebody has to talk about it, and we do. And we also show that. So the next thing is now talking about triggers. There is a little misconception that says switching has to happen due to triggers, which is not true. Switching can happen due to triggers, but it doesn't have to. So there are positive and negative triggers that can cause someone to switch, but there are also moments where you kind of just switch out of the blue with no very obvious trigger that we could point to, which would explain why we did switch. It sometimes just happens, and for example, we can switch during the nighttime, we can switch while we sleep. So I go to bed, but I don't wake up in the morning and make ourselves ready for the day. I don't know what in the night causes us to switch. Or sometimes when we eat breakfast, then suddenly we switch, and there's not really anything that causes us to switch. So switching does not always require triggers, as well as switching does not require triggers at that moment. Triggers or experiencing triggers can have a long-lasting effect. So, for example, in videos where we show our switching, some people and individuals get confused as to why we switch. How are we able to switch at that moment? Because there is no obvious trigger. But for example, we could have been through a very stressful time, through a lot of anxiety. We might have had flashbacks before, and this can have a long-lasting effect. Just because it happened, it's not just going away a few seconds after. When I like to compare it to when you had a nightmare, the next morning you might feel uneasy, you might have a very bad feeling or feel very upset throughout the whole day. It's not just something when you wake up, it's already gone away. You remember that and you remember the feelings. So it does have a longer lasting effect, and so can have triggers, especially negative triggers. They can have a long lasting effect on you, which can cause you to be in more distress and can cause you to still switch when there's no obvious trigger. As well as obvious is, what is obvious? Many triggers are or are things that other people might refer to as normal. Triggers don't always have to be like the standard things that people like to refer to or that are depicted as stigma, kind of. There can also be triggers that, like, scents can be triggers. For example, the scent of a fireplace, for example. And it's not something a lot of people associate with being a bad trigger, or a certain song, a certain environment that others might see as very beautiful can still be a trigger for another person. So what does obvious actually mean? Just because it's not obvious to you does not make it invalid or inobvious or less important and less affecting for the person that is experiencing this trigger. Some of the triggers we can share that, for example, aren't too triggering for others are music can trigger us. Certain games can trigger us. For example, just just as I said before, like, it's a trigger. It might just trigger little me. I think it does also trigger Joey a bit. It's just a game I play with dices. I really love dices. I don't know why, but I love dices and I've always been collecting dices. And it's just kind of a game where you have rounds of like throwing every dice once, and every dice that has the number 6 is going around further, and the last dice that is like left that does not like have happened to have a 6 is out, and you just repeat it until you don't have any dice left. It's a very repetitive thing, which I love. It kind of really comforts me, but that's a trigger for little me. Or certain scents, certain tastes, certain meals. I know that our girlfriend is a positive trigger for us. But then, for example, there are topics like videos, so that certain videos or certain video topics that can be very triggering in a bad way. There can be certain ways people express themselves that can, or certain words, certain ways of talking that can be triggers. Like these kind of things, certain environments, like for example doctor appointments, it's just something that's very bad. Therapists is sadly something that's very triggering for us because we have experienced and hold trauma regarding therapy. So the last thing I wanted to talk about is amnesia. DID is something that involves amnesia, but it's not always a complete blackout. It's not always that when you switch out and you aren't fronting at all, that you don't have an idea of what has happened. There are things like gray out, where you still have some kind of memory of what was happening while you were away. This memory might fade over time. It does not always have to be completely blank space. It can be, but it does not always have to be. At least that's what we experience, and these are also things that other systems have shared. So I think that's the last thing. This video is very long. It contains a lot of personal things, so I hope it was kind of helpful. If there are other things you'd like to know about switching, write it in the comments and we might be able to explain them a bit more. Remember that it's just our experience, it's from our knowledge, it's from what we know, and we are not specialists, we aren't therapists, we haven't studied anything, and we can't tell you everything. We don't speak for everyone. We are just a system with the ID. We are not every system with the ID. We're just a system. Thank you a lot for watching. We hope you enjoyed it. And check out our Patreon, our Ko-Fi, our social medias, which is all linked below. And have a good day. We love you. You are valid. And we'll see you next time. Goodbye.